That's the Vespers now. What about
Vespers.
those?
Oh, wonderful piece. Fantastic piece. It is so from the heart. Absolutely. It's maybe one of his very best creations. And it wasn't allowed to be performed in Russia, when I lived there. I remember one day, Easter time in Russia, Orthodox Easter, a word got around everywhere in the conservatory and in other circles that in that particular church, at least at 12 o'clock at midnight, they will sing Rachmaninov's Vespers. A few numbers from that. Everyone went to that church, all of us, students and teachers and everyone. And they did just a few numbers at 12 o'clock Easter in Moscow, and it was wonderful. They didn't sing too well, because church choruses are not really that great. But at least we could hear it, because it wasn't allowed to be performed. But the church could do it. And then the director of Moscow Conservatory, Mr. Sveshnikov, he had a chorus. He was a chorus master, and for decades he was the head of the most important chorus in Moscow, and he recorded Vespers. But not as the Soviet Union was it, the wonderful, incomparable, wonderful proletarian state, Soviet Union. They didn't allow it to be sold in the shops. It was 2 or 3 LPs. It was distributed amongst musicians who should be informed about Rachmaninoff's important piece. And that's all. You couldn't find it in a shop. They wouldn't put it in the shop. But I got one from the conservatory because Mr. Sveshnikov let me have a copy. It was distributed amongst the musicians.
When you were young there, what was the attitude to Rachmaninov in comparison to, say, Tchaikovsky and Glazunov and Glinka and the other Russian composers?
I think absolute devotion, along with Tchaikovsky, on the same level, I think. But Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninov, and then Prokofiev, Shostakovich, that group above anybody else. And then Rimsky, of course, Borodin, Mussorgsky, very important, but just under a little bit.
And who were the great influences on your interpretations of, or who were the first people to make you aware of what a great composer Rachmaninoff? Maybe performers you heard, or conductors or pianists?
Don't know. That's impossible to remember, because it goes from bit to bit. In the conservatory, people played it all the time. My professor played it too. Richter played it, of course. So little by little, and then Van Cliburn, who won the first Tchaikovsky competition, he played number 3 in the final round. And he played it wonderfully, magnificently. I think it's still my favorite recording.
Interesting.
And he was American, but he studied with a Russian, Rosina Levin. It was so open, absolutely unself-conscious. That's how Rachmaninoff should be, and yet controlled very well, pianistically. Wonderful performance. That was the best I heard.
Getting back to the point that I made at the beginning about cliches around, do you think there are interpretative cliches with Rachmaninoff? Are there wrong ways to play his music?
Often it could be very easily distorted if people don't understand his vocal line or what he really meant, but I can't comment on that. It's too complicated. I have a certain concept how it should be. I hope I sometimes succeeded in this. It's a thing that you can't describe what you really feel is right. It's a mystery. Vocal line is unbelievably important in Rachmaninoff. Absolutely. It's all the time, vocal line, everywhere, all the time, except some very tumultuous passages, But all the lyrical things, absolutely. I remember it's singing and singing all the time.
Well, you get that impression very much from the way he played himself.
Of course. Yeah.
That top line all the time, the singing.
And he always, when he gets to some climax, yes, and sees the world from, Himalayas, and then slowly descends down. But one should always remember that that's one of his most typical elements in almost every piece. He gets to the top, really like seeing the universe, never mind the earth, and then slowly coming down. Something to do with his attitude to life, I don't know.
What's his music like under the hands?
Well, for me, I have rather smallish hands. So for me, it was terribly difficult to play it, Rachmaninov chords. But he wrote so pianistically that if I would leave a couple of notes for comfort for my smaller hands than necessary for his music, I don't think people would notice that. Sometimes I would leave some notes that just couldn't reach simply. But basically, I could play almost every note. But some people like Van Cliburn or some other pianists who have hands about a centimeter longer than mine on each, fantastic. I couldn't do that. But I played everything with hard work, a lot of practice, but I was so involved that I couldn't step away from it.
Now, Rachmaninoff's place in 20th century Russian music in relation to, say, Prokofiev, especially the piano works and the symphonies. I know it's difficult and comparisons are odious in many respects, but how would you rate him in comparison to other works by Russians?
Prokofiev always strikes me as a very clever man. I can do this, I can do that. You know what he said about his melodical line? I'm composing a melody, yes? And just at the moment you think I'll go there, I will not go there. Just out of spite, I'll go somewhere else. And look at his melodies, it's all the time like this.
Yes.
And it's long intervals and all the time. He was a kind of enfant terrible, He always did something special to shock people. His music is like that. But there are exceptions, because he had something in him, something deep down. There was something very essential. But maybe his character was such that he would be not comfortable to reveal himself too much. Maybe that. But Rachmaninov dealt with life and death, no question. Prokofiev didn't quite. He was just too preoccupied with being a shocking composer, But Rachmaninov not. He reflected his attitude to life and death, simply. It's just as simple as that. And very successfully, most of the time.
And what would you say if you had to put your finger on it and say, the one work that seems to sum up, it can even be a prelude or an étude tableau, the one work that sums up Rachmaninoff, what would it be? Oh no, it's terrible.
Vocalise could be that. Or one of the last romances. Could be Krysalov. You remember that one?
Yes.
Pa-pa-pa. And Vocalise, maybe.
Orchestral version?
No, vocal version. You sing all the time. I mean, it's so true of him, Could cry.